Good afternoon. Quick question, who has kids? Who likes kids? That's another question, right? And who knows, have you ever known a kid? Okay, so this is going to help you on how to teach Bitcoin, not only for adults, but also for children. So my name is Deanna Heikkinen. I'm a longtime educator and historian. This is my husband, Joel Marquez. He works in tech and is also a writer. Last year, we wrote a book on the history of money. It's called Shells to Satoshi, the Story of Money and the Rise of Bitcoin. And I think that in order to understand Bitcoin on a philosophical, on a deep level, so it's not just a shiny toy, you have to just understand the history of money. It tells you the why we need Bitcoin, and so that's what we're going to talk about today.
So how do you teach Bitcoin? I'm sure this is a question that we in our lives who have Bitcoin are trying to spread the good word and gospel of Satoshi. How many people have come up, how many people have heard others come to you and say, I wish I'd gotten in 10 years ago and I would have generational wealth by now, right? We hear that all the time, and the truth is, no, they wouldn't have. They would have sold when they 3x their initial investment. What is missing from this equation is a true understanding of what Bitcoin is and what it means to you. So if you're trying to spread that word, if you're trying to get across the meaning and value of Bitcoin to whoever you want to put on the life raft as the Titanic is sinking, the first thing that you want to do is figure out why would they be interested at all? What is the why? Are they trying to save money? Are they trying to buy a house, pay for their child's education? Is there some other underlying reason why they might be interested at all? So the thing that is missing, the thing that keeps people from holding on to that initial buy-in is conviction.
I don't know where our conviction slide is.
All right, so conviction is the acquiring of knowledge, the confidence that you get in something that you understand fully through an extended process of knowledge. And so this process is, it's not easy. Like, to understand anything fully, it's going to take time. So I know a lot of us have tried to convince our friends and family to get on board the life raft, but we understand that it's a life raft. We don't know their context. We don't know if they understand that the boat is sinking. So how do you get there with them? We have come here from El Salvador. We've lived in El Salvador for the last 2 years. And El Salvador is famous for issuing a Bitcoin wallet to every one of their citizens and putting $30 on it. So guess what happened? They all sold, well, not all of them, but many of them sold that initial stake immediately because they didn't have conviction. So I'm going to start out by just giving you a good concrete example of a friend of mine who I've known for decades, and I've been talking to him about Bitcoin for at least 12 years. And on the surface, it would seem like my friend would be receptive to the message of Bitcoin, libertarian, fan of Ayn Rand, interested in money and economics, has read von Mises, but there was something that he just couldn't get over. And I had these discussions over the course of at least 10 to 12 years with him, and he just couldn't get past some certain things that he accepted on his own intellectual journey. Namely, he's kind of a gold bug, right? So there are a lot of people whose initial premises start from some kind of thing that they hold that you have to get them to get over, and gold is one of them. So I'm going to throw that example at you and show you one way that we were able to get this guy to come on board. We wrote a book. And it wasn't just for him. It was for everybody. But this is the story of the book. The book is called Shells to Satoshi, The Story of Money. We told the story of money's evolution. So Deanna's going to start out with that story.
So I have a background in history and anthropology. So the way I look at the past is kind of coupled with those two things. And early societies were band-level societies. You had 10 to maybe 30 or 40 people living in small groups. Everything about their society was pretty simplistic by our modern terms. And so they hunted, and usually the leader of the group would be the best hunter, maybe the patriarch of the family. And they could have, they didn't have to have a lot. They didn't actually have a lot of things. They kind of roamed around the landscape chasing just to get enough calories to survive. So these societies didn't need a lot. They could trade with other groups and they would come in contact with. Sometimes they would exchange women as marriage partners. Sometimes they would exchange things that, if they owned rights, because they did have some sort of rights of land. Say in North America, they had rights to the buffalo. They had a buffalo jump there. They could trade, but it was very minimal. And what would happen is that when these groups started to grow in complexity, this doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's not like everybody wants to be a state-level society. We still have band-level societies on the planet today. Pretty rare, but they do still exist. And so they don't need all this complexity for money because they're living very simple lives. When it gets more complex, the next level would be a tribe-level society. More people, little more sophistication, maybe you have a shaman. And so as humans get more complex, they start seeing this, what we call the double coincidence of wants. And if you were here yesterday, there was a great example of that in the morning with that kind of interactive game, which I absolutely love. I'm going to probably steal that for my own classes. And so basically, I am a goat herder. I have goats. I have goat milk. You can't really save goat milk when you don't have refrigeration. And I need shoes for my family, so I need someone who is going to turn the hide into shoes, blah, blah, blah. But it's hard to exchange an entire goat for one pair of shoes, and that's the double coincidence of wants. That becomes a problem when we start seeing humans living in more complex societies. And so what we see is that now they start having this mental ledger. And you can keep it that way for quite a while on band and tribe level societies. The next level is called a chiefdom. Now we're having hundreds of people. They're horticulturalists, so they're intentionally growing their own food, or they're pastoralists, they have herd animals, yaks, goats, cattle, and they're moving around the landscape, but there's a lot more complexity. And the mental ledger starts, they can keep it, but it really starts to break down. And this is going to lead to commodity money. And commodity money, we see shells. Now, in some Native North American groups, particularly I can think of one off the top of my head in California, the Chumash and the Yokit Native Americans. And they would use shells, but it was still barter. It wasn't like the shells were exactly money. It wasn't quite cowrie shells, wasn't agri beads, wasn't Mayan cacao yet. But they start having this commodity and they start substituting for things. We see this in early state-level societies in Mesopotamia. They had these little metal, looks like little metal kind of rough rocks, and this little bullion, and because they measured everything in grain. Well, a big bushel of grain is hard to lug around, so they start replacing it with these metal. Then we see the first banks that were attached to the temples. Religion was very much integrated, and so this commodity money really starts to spring up. We see it with nutmeg, salt. I mean, pretty much, even today we see a lot of commodity money. You can, at least I'm an American, so at least in the United States, you can, trade hog futures of what the price of pork is going to be in the future. So we see a lot of commodity. But this is also going to become a problem, because it's physical. Those Mesopotamians with those big bushels of grain, you can't lug those around everywhere. So that's when they get the little metal ingots. And now, as gold starts to become more and more important, lugging gold around. How many shipwrecks have you heard of in your lifetime being discovered and they find the Spanish bullion? How cool is that? I'm an archaeologist. That would be like way cool, because usually you get to keep a little bit of it. But we see the limits of physicality start really breaking money down. And this is why teaching the history of money is so important, because you start seeing how humans are thinking and trying to solve problems. Money is a problem solver, and it's invented and reinvented over and over and over, so we can figure out. All money is what we get in exchange for our time and energy. As humans, that is our biggest commodity, our time and our energy. In return, we get money. What that money is dependent on the civilization, the time period, the context of where we live. I love being in a Bitcoin time frame, because this is the best money that's ever existed. But money becomes more abstract. So I'm going to hand it back over to Joel, and he's going to break down some of these abstractions.
So in order to get to the point where you can facilitate trade, in order to be able to get goods from one part of the world to another, it becomes increasingly difficult to do that with physical objects as the intermediary, because gold is heavy. So how are you going to, if you are living in like the 12th century and you are in Italy and you want to trade with somebody who has a needed commodity somewhere in the mountains up north? So doing that with gold would require you to send a caravan up there. But what we see is ways to facilitate the physicality by changing it into something more abstract. So the first abstraction that we're talking about here is the paper abstraction. The paper money was first used in China and around the 9th century as warehouse receipts for the thing that everyone really wanted, which was gold. And then the merchants decided that the paper receipts could facilitate trade better with the lightweight promises of gold rather than the gold itself, and that led to the creation of the Silk Road. So now you could take your camel caravans and load them with paper instead of gold, but that of course led to one of the problems with abstraction. When you abstract the value away from the thing that's actually doing the exchanging, when you abstract the gold from the paper, you open up the door to corruption. And that's what happened with paper money. Apart from the fact that so much paper would overload these caravans that the paper would fly away in the wind, and they nicknamed it flying money because of that. The warehouse owners could issue more paper receipts than actually existed in the vault. So does that sound familiar? And so the next abstraction came about in Europe, in specifically Italy, when the bankers of Italy, specifically the Medici family, discovered double entry bookkeeping. And this allowed them to keep really accurate records that not only showed how accounts could be settled, but who were good credit risks at the same time. So then, if you were a merchant in Italy, you could trade at far off distances because the Medici owned bank branches that allowed you to settle your accounts all the way at your destination, rather than needing to take the thing that everyone regarded as valuable, which was the gold. You could take the promise of the Medici bankers, who could say, yeah, we got you. We got your, we're backing that with our prestige, because everybody knows who the Medicis are. So that's the second abstraction, the ledger. And now we're back to the ledger. You know, in the band level societies, the trusted elder could be the bookkeeper because everyone trusted him, and it was a small enough society that you knew where the guy lived, right? So with the Medicis, they were so prestigious, they had so much power and so much of a connection to the church that everyone took their word for it. Now that leads us to the third abstraction, which is basically ledger at a global scale. If you can settle your accounts on semi-locally with your bank branches, what if you had banks that had even more prestige and even more importantly, armies? What if those nation states could guarantee the settlement of accounts by their own prestige, their own statehood, their own armies? And that's what led to the creation of the global-sized central banks. And as we remove ourselves, as in history, human beings started to get further and further away from the underlying value that those accounts represented, the corruption comes in. And this leads us to the tension that always occurs with the advancement of new technology in money's history. Between the abstractions that allow great wealth to be created and great trade to occur at greater and greater distances, it also opened a back door to corruption by the entities that were in charge of the settlement. So that means that the very thing that allowed great trade and great wealth creation to take place also had the potential for exponential scale in corruption at the same time. So this is the tension that we explore in our book in more detail. But that leads us to the last part of this story, which is how Bitcoin broke that cycle, how it broke the tension between the abstractness that allows value to be communicated at great distances to make trade and wealth creation possible, but closed the door on the need to delegate the trust to those large entities that for hundreds of years could just say, take my word for it. You know, your money's good here. I will settle this because I have the authority and power. With Bitcoin, we now have a system that allows us to settle those accounts with math and cryptography. So that brings us to the next slide. So this is the thing, to bring this back to my pal, who I've been talking about this for years, and who I just saw last week for the first time in 2 years. He comes over to me and he says, I'm all in, man. I'm all in. I've gotten off zero. I get it now. Because the thing that he couldn't get out of his head was that you needed a physical thing that represented value. And what he didn't see was that the very physicality of the thing kept us from having a culture and a society that could produce great wealth at huge scale. It's the abstraction that you need, and if you can get rid of the corruption that abstraction makes possible by using Bitcoin, now you've got something. So he comes to me and he says, I'm working on my wife now too. So that's not everybody's story. It worked for him because our book helped answer his pain point, the thing that was his stumbling block, right? If you're going to teach this to other people, it's a matter of finding that out. Maybe our book will help, or maybe just keep the doors open and keep talking to your friends.
Thank you very much. If you're curious, I'm an educator, historian. I could talk about this till the cows come home, wherever they are. So come see us. We have a table over there, and don't give up. I know everybody, I hear I'm not going to orange pill anymore so much. That's okay. All you have to do is plant a little tiny seed, walk away for 2 years, and they're going to come to you.